My name is Claire Bennett, and for the first time in years, I felt like everything in my life was finally falling into place. I was standing inside my little store, Willow and Clay, a cozy corner boutique I had poured my heart and savings into. Handmade journals lined the shelves. Watercolor greeting cards fluttered gently in a soft breeze from the open window, and the scent of lavender from a candle near the register wrapped the room in warmth. After years of struggling, planning, and pinching every penny, I had built something that felt truly mine. Outside, the town of Silverbrook was bathed in a golden sunset. This place wasn't glamorous. It was a quiet lakeside town where people knew your birthday before you remembered it yourself. But for me and Ethan, it was home. Ethan. Just thinking about him made me smile. We met 4 years ago at a local art festival. He was a high school art teacher, standing behind a booth full of his students' work, explaining their brushstrokes like a proud parent. I was there, selling my hand-bound journals. He bought one, I bought a painting, and by the end of the day, we were eating ice cream on the pier. Now, 4 years later, he was my fiancé. Kind, steady, creative, and most importantly, the one person who never made me feel like I had to prove my worth. Tonight was our engagement party, hosted at the Elm House, a rustic farm-to-table restaurant that sat on the edge of a sunflower field just outside town. Everything was perfect. String lights twinkled above the long farmhouse table, mason jars held tiny candles and wildflowers, and soft music from a string trio floated in the background. Friends from high school, Ethan's fellow teachers, and even some of my loyal customers had come to celebrate with us. But among the smiling faces, I felt a familiar knot in my stomach tighten when I saw my parents Margaret and Greg Bennett sitting stiffly near the front. Next to them, scrolling her phone with complete disinterest, was my younger sister, Emma. Emma had always been different, spoiled, dramatic, and endlessly supported by my parents, no matter how many times she failed. She dropped out of college, burned through her savings on a luxury wellness brand, and most recently, declared she was planning her own wedding to her boyfriend of 6 months. And yet, despite everything, I tried to stay hopeful tonight. This was my moment. Our moment. I wanted to believe we could be a family, just for one evening. Margaret stood up suddenly, tapping her wine glass with a spoon. The sound echoed, and conversation hushed as people turned to face her. I smiled politely, expecting the usual motherly toast, maybe even something sweet about love and family. Instead, her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt something shift. "I just want to say," she began, smiling thinly, "how proud we are of Claire and Ethan. May your marriage be filled with happiness, growth, and understanding." There was polite applause. Then she added, louder, clearer, "And while we're all gathered here, I have a little family update. After discussing with Greg, we've decided that the wedding fund we originally set aside for Claire will now be given to Emma instead, as her wedding is coming up soon, and she and her fiancé are in greater need." The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at her, blinking, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. Around me, heads slowly turned in confusion. A waiter awkwardly lowered a tray. Ethan's hand on my back froze. I let out a soft laugh. "That's a joke, right?" Margaret's smile vanished. "No, Claire, it's not. You and Ethan have good jobs, a stable life. Emma and Evan are struggling. They deserve a fair start too." My heart dropped. That fund, $45,000, wasn't just a wedding fund. It was part of my future. I'd used it to help build Willow and Clay, to book our modest wedding, and to save for a down payment on our first home. It was given to me years ago, in my name. And now, in front of everyone, my mother was trying to take it away. The tension in the room was suffocating. Emma stood, arms crossed, glaring like I'd just robbed her. I looked at Ethan, whose face had gone pale. Then I turned back to my mother. "That money is mine," I said quietly, "and I'm not giving it to Emma." And that was when everything unraveled. For a second, nobody moved. You could hear a fork clatter somewhere at the other end of the long table. The soft music had stopped. Conversations were frozen mid-sentence. I felt every pair of eyes in the room shift toward me, then toward my mother, as if trying to make sense of what had just been said. Emma crossed her arms and raised her chin, her expression defiant, like she'd been waiting for this moment. You don't have to make a scene, Claire, she said coolly. Just be decent for once and do the right thing. I blinked. The right thing? Emma, I've worked for years, saved every cent, planned carefully. You burned through your fund on some failed business and spa trips, and now you think I should just hand over what's left of mine? My voice trembled, but I stood tall. Across the table, Margaret gave me that look I knew too well, tight-lipped, cold. The one she used when I stepped out of line as a child. It's not about what's fair, she said calmly. It's about what's needed. Emma needs this more. She's struggling. She's struggling, I repeated slowly. And I'm what? Just an ATM? That's not what we said, Greg mumbled, looking deeply uncomfortable. You didn't need to say it, I said, shaking my head. You made it crystal clear. Emma suddenly slammed her napkin on the table and stood up. Wow. Selfish. Just like always. You always had more. You always acted like you were better than me just because you actually followed through with stuff. So what if I messed up a few times? That doesn't mean I deserve nothing. Emma, I said, my tone steady but cold. You don't get to call me selfish for refusing to bail you out again. This isn't jealousy. This is entitlement. And then it happened. Margaret stepped forward, her heels clacking sharply against the wooden floor. And before I could react, her palm struck my cheek. Hard. Gasps echoed through the restaurant. The sharp crack of skin against skin hung in the air like thunder. My head turned with the impact, and for a moment, everything felt silent and slow. My cheek burned, but it wasn't the pain that shocked me most, it was the betrayal. The audacity. The raw, public display of everything I'd known deep down for years. She had always chosen Emma. I looked back at her, stunned. You hit me. Because I wouldn't give you my wedding fund? She didn't respond. Her face was red, chest rising and falling with rage. Even Emma looked stunned now, her mouth slightly open. Then I heard it. A quiet voice near the bar. One of the servers, speaking into a phone. Yes, we need assistance. There's been a physical assault at the Elm House. It was like the moment broke open something in the room. People began whispering, shifting in their seats, some standing awkwardly to check on me, others pretending they hadn't seen a thing. Ethan came to my side immediately, his arm wrapping around my shoulders, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might shatter his molars. She just assaulted you, he whispered. I know, I said softly. And she did it in front of everyone. Minutes later, red and blue lights pulsed outside. The sheriff's department responded quicker than I expected. 2 officers stepped into the restaurant, their eyes scanning the room. The air turned cold. When they reached us, one officer asked quietly, "MAAM, were you the one struck?" I nodded, slowly. And then, for the first time in my life, I chose not to protect her. Yes, I said clearly. I want to press charges. Margaret's eyes widened as the officers turned to her. This is ridiculous. This is a family matter. She's exaggerating. But the officer cut her off. MAAM, public assault is a criminal offense. Please step outside with us. As they led her toward the door in handcuffs, the entire room stared in stunned silence. Greg followed behind her, his expression unreadable. Emma just stood there, frozen. Nobody clapped. Nobody moved. The engagement party was over, but I was just getting started. That night, the silence in our home was louder than any siren. Ethan and I sat on the couch, side by side but not speaking for a long time. My cheek was still sore from the slap, though I'd applied a cold compress the moment we got home. But honestly, it wasn't the sting that kept me from sleeping. It was the emptiness. It was the realization that my mother, the woman who taught me to braid my hair, who cheered for me during art competitions, who always told me to keep my head high, had chosen my sister's wedding over my dignity. Over me. Ethan finally broke the silence. You did the right thing, pressing charges. I know, I said, but my voice sounded distant, foreign. But I still feel like I just nuked my own family. He took my hand. No, they did that the second she hit you, and Emma stood there, smiling like she'd won something. I nodded, biting my lip to hold back the wave of emotion. They think I'm the problem, that I'm cold, selfish. Ethan looked me dead in the eyes. Claire, you've been generous to a fault. You gave them time, space, even your peace. You didn't deserve that slap and you don't owe them anything. He was right, but knowing the truth didn't make the weight on my chest any lighter. The next morning, I awoke to dozens of texts. Some were from extended family cousins, aunts, a few old friends asking if what they heard was true. Others were from acquaintances in town. Silverbrook wasn't exactly the kind of place where things stayed quiet. Everyone knew everyone, but none of the texts were from my mother, or Greg, or Emma. Later that week, I received an envelope from a local law firm. At first, I thought it might be paperwork related to the assault case, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. They were suing me. Margaret and Greg Harper were formally requesting control of the wedding fund, claiming that it had been intended for education purposes only and that I had misused the account. I sat there frozen, rereading the words. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me again. Ethan walked in, coffee in hand, and froze when he saw my face. "What is it?" I handed him the letter. He read it, lips tightening. "Unbelievable. They're trying to take your money through the courts now?" "I can't believe it either," I said softly. "They told me when I was 17 that the fund was mine, no strings attached. It was a gift. I'd used some of it for art school, got a scholarship for the rest, then let the account grow. I planned everything with it: our wedding, the deposit on a small cottage outside of town, my future." Emma, on the other hand, had gone to a private design institute in Seattle, dropped out after a year and a half, then used her remaining fund to open a pop-up event planning services that tanked in 6 months. Now that hers was gone, they wanted mine. But this wasn't just about the money. This was about punishment, about control, about my mother making sure Emma never felt like she lost, even if it meant steamrolling me in the process. I called a lawyer the next day. Her name was Ava Benton, sharp and composed, with years of experience in family estate disputes. After scanning through the documents, she looked up at me calmly. "They don't have a leg to stand on. The account is legally yours. Their claim hinges on a verbal understanding, but those are almost impossible to prove in court." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Then why go this far? Why put me through this? Ava leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. "Because, Claire, when people lose control over someone they always had power over, they panic. They'll burn everything down before they admit they were wrong." That hit me hard. I wasn't just up against a court case. I was up against a lifetime of being the responsible one, the quiet one, the daughter who kept the family glued together while Emma got excuse after excuse. This wasn't just a slap. It was a declaration. That week, I sat down at my studio in Willow and Clay, my little handmade shop in town. I opened my sketch pad but couldn't draw. My mind was too cluttered. I stared at the blank page for hours before finally writing one sentence at the bottom. "You don't have to bleed to keep people warm." I stared at it for a long time. For the first time, I wasn't going to. I was done bleeding for people who'd never hand me a bandage. 3 weeks into the legal case, I thought I was emotionally prepared for anything. I was wrong. It started with a phone call from my cousin Lily. "Claire, the first, so sorry to hear about the wedding being canceled." I blinked, confused. "What?" "The wedding's not canceled." There was a pause. "Your mom said you and Ethan broke up, that he cheated, and you called everything off." My heart dropped. Within the next hour, I got 3 more calls: distant relatives, an old college friend, and one of my former professors, all gently asking if I was okay and if it was true that the wedding was off due to some drama. By evening, I had dozens of voicemails and text messages. Someone was spreading lies. And it wasn't just word of mouth. A fake email, pretending to be me, had been sent to multiple guests saying the wedding was canceled and to disregard any further communication. I never sent it. It wasn't even from my email address. That night, Ethan came home looking furious. "You're not going to believe this," he said, pulling out his phone. "Emma messaged me and sent these." He showed me several photos, terribly edited, laughably fake, but disturbing. They were screenshots of me, a photoshopped version of me hugging some random guy in a cafe. The face was mine, but the body was off. The lighting didn't match. The clothes were ones I never owned. "She said you've been cheating on me, that I should call off the wedding before I make the biggest mistake of my life." I felt sick, violated. Ethan wrapped his arms around me tightly. "I don't believe any of it. But your sister, your mom, they're playing dirty now. I nodded, trying to steady my breath. They can't win. I won't let them ruin everything. The next day, my lawyer, Ava, filed a complaint for defamation and impersonation in addition to the ongoing lawsuit. But even as we fought back, the damage had begun to spread. A few of my shop's regular customers had heard the rumors. One woman quietly asked if the wedding was really off. Another asked if I was okay after the breakup. I wanted to scream. I had spent 4 years building a life with Ethan, saving for our future, pouring love into every detail of our plans, and now a web of lies was threatening to unravel it all. My mother and Emma weren't just trying to take my wedding fund, they were trying to destroy me. Publicly, personally, completely. So Ethan and I made a decision. We weren't going to play defense anymore. We doubled security at our venue, hired a professional to monitor social media impersonation, and blocked every number linked to my family, even Margaret and Greg. The wedding was still on. But now it was being planned under a cloud of constant sabotage. Yet, strangely, I felt stronger than ever. I no longer had illusions about my family. I no longer made excuses for their behavior. I saw them clearly now, people who confused love with control and family with entitlement. And I was done letting them define who I was. The morning of our wedding rehearsal, I was sipping coffee in the back office of Willow and Clay, double-checking the final vendor list, when I got a call from our wedding coordinator, Danny. Her voice was tense. "Claire, we just had a situation." I straightened in my seat. "What happened?" "One of our vendors got a call from someone claiming to be you. They tried to cancel the cake order. Another tried to reschedule the photographer. Same story, someone using your full name, acting frantic." My stomach turned. "Was it Emma?" "We can't prove it, but—" Danny sighed. "Claire, you need to lock this down. Now." I hung up and immediately called Ava, my lawyer. Within hours, Ava had filed a cease and desist letter against Emma for identity fraud and interference with a legal event. We had the fake call logs, the spoofed emails, even the voice recordings from the bakery's answering machine. The voice was unmistakably Emma's, but that wasn't the worst of it. That evening, our security team, already on high alert after the fake wedding cancellations, caught something disturbing. A motion-triggered camera at our venue entrance picked up Emma sneaking around the property at 11 p.m., wearing a hoodie and gloves. She was carrying a tote bag. Inside, a can of red paint, several packs of glitter, and a roll of black duct tape. My hands shook as I watched the footage. She was going to destroy the wedding decor. Or, worse, ruin my dress, which had already been delivered to the venue. I had never seen such calculated cruelty in my life. Not just sabotage. This was revenge, fueled by jealousy, pride, and maybe the fact that for once she wasn't the chosen one. I was. We called the sheriff. Emma was detained on site before she could get inside the main hall. When questioned, she claimed she was just visiting and wanted to see the setup, but the supplies in her bag said otherwise. The sheriff called me, gave me the option. "Do you want to press charges?" I stared at Ethan, who sat beside me on the couch, rubbing slow circles on my back. My eyes were hot with tears, not sadness, but fury. I had already filed one lawsuit, already faced a courtroom, already lost half my family, and I wasn't going to let this ruin the most important day of my life. "No," I finally said, "not today. Just make sure she's nowhere near us again." "Understood," he said. "We'll issue a no trespass order immediately." The next morning, rehearsal went on as planned. But I didn't feel like a bride. I felt like a general preparing for battle. I stood at the edge of the garden venue, watching the crew secure every gate, double-check every entry point, and coordinate with 2 plainclothes security officers we hired for the day. I had to protect what mattered, because my family had shown me they wouldn't. My mother never called to apologize. My father texted once saying, "We wish things could have been different." And Emma? She posted a cryptic story on Instagram. It's funny how some people steal your spotlight and call it justice. The comment section was full of her friends calling her brave, misunderstood. But the truth was finally clear for anyone who cared to look. Despite everything, I was ready. Ready to walk down that aisle. Ready to start a new life. and most of all, ready to leave the past exactly where it belonged, behind me. The morning of our wedding arrived with the first blush of sunrise spilling into our apartment. For a moment, I let myself lie still in bed, eyes closed, soaking in the quiet before the storm. Then reality crept in. This wasn't just a wedding day, it was a line in the sand. I got dressed in silence, surrounded by my closest friends in the bridal suite. My dress, a soft ivory gown with a flowing lace train, hung waiting near the window, untouched by Emma's failed sabotage. Thanks to the venue staff, everything had been double-checked. No paint, no glitter, no destruction. But still, I couldn't shake the weight in my chest. My parents hadn't called. Emma had vanished from social media since the sheriff removed her. And even though I should have felt peace, what I really felt was grief. Not over them, but over what I'd finally let go of. "Claire," Isabel whispered, adjusting the strap on my shoulder. "You okay?" I nodded. "As okay as I can be when I have security guards at my wedding." She gave me a half smile. "At least you're marrying a man who'd fight off a whole army for you." That made me laugh. A real one. I needed that. Outside, the venue was radiant. Sunlight danced through the trees. A soft breeze stirred the white drapes hanging from the wooden arch. Guests began to arrive, escorted through a private entrance after showing their invitation and ID. Two plainclothes officers flanked the gate, photos of Emma, Erica, and Owen tucked into their pockets. Ethan stood near the altar, buttoning his jacket, his best man adjusting his boutonniere. He looked calm, but I knew better. He was scanning the crowd, every so often glancing toward the back gates, like he expected something or someone to appear. But they didn't, because they couldn't anymore. When the music started, I took a breath so deep it felt like the first one in months. Uncle Brian, steady and proud, held out his arm. "Ready, kiddo?" "More than ever," I whispered. As I walked down the aisle, faces turned, but not with pity, with awe. My coworkers, college friends, distant aunts and uncles, they all knew. They'd heard the whispers, seen the news blurbs, watched the story unfold like some sad drama they couldn't look away from. But today, they didn't see a victim. They saw a woman who survived the storm and still chose love. Ethan's eyes welled up the moment he saw me. He didn't blink, didn't move, just waited, like he had from the beginning, with quiet strength and unwavering patience. When I reached him, he leaned in and whispered, "They can't touch this. Not now. Not ever." The ceremony was beautiful, raw, emotional, and stripped of all the pretense I used to think weddings needed. We didn't need a massive guest list, designer shoes, or a photo op with a champagne tower. We just needed this, two people who had walked through fire and still chose each other. When the officiant asked for our vows, I looked Ethan in the eye and said, voice steady despite the lump in my throat, "I spent a long time believing that love came with conditions. That loyalty had to be earned over and over again. But with you, I learned that real love isn't a bargain. It's a promise. One you've kept every single day." His hands tightened around mine. "I vow," I continued, "to never let the past decide my future. And I vow to always protect what we've built, because you protect me." When he spoke, his voice cracked once, but only once. "I don't care what we've lost," he said, "because we've already won." When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause wasn't polite. It was explosive. People stood, some cheered. A few even wiped away tears. Not because the moment was perfect, but because it was real. And in a world that had tried so hard to break us, that was the biggest victory of all. The first morning of our honeymoon was silent, except for the sound of waves lapping against the shore. No court dates, no email alerts, no phone calls from my parents trying to twist the truth. Just me and Ethan, and the life we were finally allowed to start. We stayed in a quiet coastal town in Oregon, far from Cannon Beach, far from the past. It was simple, a cabin by the sea. We spent hours walking barefoot along the shore, cooking dinner together, and falling asleep with the windows open to the breeze. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't bracing for something to fall apart. When we returned home, the apartment felt different. The wedding photos were framed and hung on the hallway wall. Ethan left little notes in the kitchen before he went to work. The silence in the space wasn't cold anymore, it was comforting. We didn't talk about Emma or Erica Owen, not right away, but life had a way of reminding us. 2 weeks after we got back, I ran into my cousin, Sarah, at the local bookstore. She gave me a long hug and said, "You look peaceful, like someone who finally took their life back." I smiled. "That's exactly how it feels." She hesitated, then added, "I thought you should know. Your mom and dad took out a second mortgage to fund Emma's wedding. It's all over the family group chat. Apparently, they went all out. Lavish. Ridiculous." I said nothing. Sarah lowered her voice. But no one really came. A lot of people were uncomfortable after everything that happened. Half the cousins declined. Aunt May said it felt more like a performance than a celebration. I could picture it. The expensive decor, the forced smiles, the layers of denial stacked high like wedding cake tears. "They tried so hard to pretend none of it ever happened," Sarah added. "But people remember, Claire. They saw what they did to you. That night, I found myself standing in the doorway of our guest room still undecorated. Ethan walked in behind me. "Thinking of painting it soft green?" he asked gently. I shook my head, just thinking how different everything could have been. He didn't push, just stood beside me and said, "And yet, here we are." A few days later, a letter arrived. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting. My mother's. I stared at the envelope for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a 3-page letter. Carefully written. Surprisingly calm. She apologized for the slap, the lies, the lawsuit. For choosing Emma over and over again. She wrote about how Emma had become increasingly demanding, how she now treated their home like her own, rearranging furniture, barking orders, expecting silence after 9 p.m. She mentioned that Owen was on blood pressure medication now, that they were struggling with debt, that they missed me. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just asked if maybe one day I'd be willing to talk. I folded the letter and placed it in the top drawer of my desk, beside our marriage license and a stack of wedding thank you cards. Maybe one day, but not today. Today was for peace, for building something beautiful out of the wreckage. Ethan and I began working on the guest room that weekend, not for them, but for us. For the future, we painted the walls a warm sage, hung up prints of places we wanted to visit, filled the bookshelves with novels we'd each loved. It was a room for possibility, a reminder that no matter how deep the scars ran, healing was still possible when you chose love, boundaries, and truth.